Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little chat about a topic that may have occurred to some of you, both committed classical music mavens and beginning listeners, and it's this. Can you ever get sick of listening to the basic repertoire? Well, my answer is absolutely yes, you can. And so I want to offer some strategies for how to deal with that phenomenon. But let me begin by talking about a realization that I had a while ago as I was, sort of getting into classical music. Classical music is based upon the idea of classical music, a rather limited group of canonical basic repertoire pieces. And this canon was established mostly in the 19th century as a result of the historicizing trend and nationalism of nation building of European countries in determining what their greatest cultural objects were. And each country went through this and did that. And they came up with people who were the exemplars of their culture and their history and their lineage and tradition. And this all was absorbed into what we now call the basic canon of classical music. And we don't even think about it because that canon, that group of people, the Beethoven symphonies, the Brahms symphonies, the Verdi operas, the Debussy and Ravel, the French people, Bach and Handel and all of that stuff, we just take it for granted now that this is the basic repertoire of classical music without ever asking ourselves, how did it come to be that way? We accept it. And I mean, there's a good reason to accept it because it's really great music. It wasn't like these people were wrong. It's just that there's a lot more out there than actually got into the classical canon. So let's start with that first proposition, that there is this body of work that we're all supposed to regard as the ultimate classics and listen to over and over and over again endlessly. Now, I always loved classical music, and I'm speaking purely personally now, because of its variety, because you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of years of music from dozens of different countries and parts of the world that I'd never been to, and that it came in purely instrumental and vocal bits. I mean, just the range and endless variety of stuff to enjoy. That's what I liked about it. I did not really get the proposition that you should be listening to the same things over and 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 over ad nauseum, possibly in different performances, looking for minute distinctions in the way that different artists interpreted the same stuff. That does keep that endless amount of repetition somewhat fresh. I grant you it does. But for me, the constant repetition of the same music was no different from what I disliked about popular music. Classical people are very snooty. They like to think that they're, above the mere popular song type thing, the top 40, that kind of stuff. But that's exactly what the classical canon is. It's a top 40 list. And not only is it a top 40 list, but, it always made me nuts when I was growing up listening to the radio, just normal radio that everybody listened to, that you heard the same songs constantly, over and over and over again. They were only 3 minutes long. I mean, I liked some of those songs, that's true, but there was a limit to how many billions of times I wanted to hear them. And for me, I flattered myself to think, well, I listened to a symphony, at least it's 45 minutes long. It's longer than a 3-minute song, so maybe it was better. If I repeated that 5,000 times, it was better than repeating a song 3,000 times. But eventually, I got to a point in my life where it wasn't better, where I just couldn't bear the thought of hearing the same thing over and over again. So I looked for new things. I discovered Wagner. I discovered Mahler. I discovered Bruckner. I discovered Dvorak. I discovered Martinu, yes, and Janacek, the Czech people, and then the interesting French people. Of course, I love Debussy and Ravel, but then I discovered Albert Roussel. Yay! There was more there to listen to. And so I gave up listening to the classical repertoire. I just quit. I listened to it as infrequently as possible. I mean, being a music critic, I had to listen to new recordings. And as often as not, those new recordings would be the same old, quite frequently. And so I would listen to it, but only as a professional obligation. My pleasurable listening, the things I listened to, was in unusual repertoire. I discovered Vaughan Williams and Malcolm Arnold and the whole British school that was wonderful, and they didn't do atonal stuff in the 20th century so much, and how much I enjoyed getting to know them. Havergal Brian, good heavens! Some of these names you may not have heard of, but they were all new and fresh, but working in familiar forms, in the kind of music that I knew that I enjoyed anyway. And so I could take a break. And I think taking a break is a very healthy thing. If you've heard 20,000 recordings of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, give it a rest for a year. It'll do you good. Believe me, I was as hooked on Mahler as anybody could possibly be when I was in high school and my early years in college. And then I just stopped. I stopped listening to it unless something new came along that I had to. Now, part of this is a function of internalizing the music, right? When you know it really well, when you know it by heart, you almost don't need to listen to it anymore. It just becomes a part of you. It's a part of your life. It's part of your existence. Someone says, the New World Symphony. I know the New World Symphony. I know every minute of it. I could sing it to you from beginning to end. I know every single bar, and I love it. And of course, I love hearing it, but it also exists in my brain as a construct, as a work, as a fully formed whole that I can summon up at will. Maybe some people don't approach listening like that, or they have a different experience. But getting to know a piece of music really, really, really well almost obviates the need to ever hear it, I think. I enjoy hearing it, of course. I enjoy it very much, but I don't need it in the same way because I know it. And, if you know something, you know something. So it really helps me. And I'm just throwing this out there. It may help you. When you know something really well, put it aside. After you've felt that you've, soaked it up, put it aside, and then come back to it. Come back to it in a few months or weeks or years or however long it takes. And you'll be amazed at how fresh and wonderful it sounds again. One of the phases I went through, and I'm having a cat thing here. Oh my goodness, they're running around with their toys. Mildred, come here. All right, she's underneath my feet. One of the things that I really remember very, very, very vividly was saying, okay, I'm not listening to the standard repertoire anymore. I'm sick of it. I've just had enough. It's just overplayed, and it's getting tedious, and I'm bored with it. Well, you really shouldn't be bored with something. I think that's absolutely great and fabulous. You can be bored by overexposure to anything, no matter how great it is. The idea that the classics are perennially fresh and will always, show a new face, and that they're tirelessly wonderful and they never go out of style or out of date. That's all bullshit. That's complete nonsense. Yes, of course, if you're exposed to the same thing day after day, you will get sick of it. And that's healthy and normal. That's perfectly normal. Nobody who invented this concept of classical music, of these, perennially fresh pieces that appeal to everybody, equally forever, that was done before there were 5,000 recordings of every one of those pieces. That theory was, again, one of those 19th century sort of hangers-on that we're still dealing with. It could not possibly have contemplated this constant, perpetual access we have to the same stuff in billions of different performances. That is a totally different circumstance and scenario. So my experience is, when I put those aside, if I come back to them and they sound fresh to me, even if I know them, even if I've internalized them and don't feel the need to listen to them again necessarily, the longer you give it a break, the better it sounds when you finally come back to it. And you begin to realize, or I began to realize, well, as they say in the UK, all's not false that's taught in the public schools, you know? I mean, in other words, there's a reason that stuff is the greatest stuff, because it really does have a certain staying power if you allow it to stay fresh. That's the proviso. That's the proviso. And I know a lot of people are tempted to jump into the world of classical music and listen to 500 versions of Bruckner's Fourth Symphony. And, you know, that's like not a good idea. You can become fixated on anything, but I regard fixation as an unhealthy listening habit. Just like, all these cult people, the Mahler cults, the Bruckner cults, the Wagner cults, the artist cults. Ugh, God forbid, the Furtwängler cults, the Mengelberg cults, the Argerich cults, you name it. None of that's healthy. We need variety. We need to be open-minded. We need to experience the breadth and range of all of this stuff that's out there for our enjoyment. And this is me again. I know that there were people out there who were very happy limiting their listening to one performance of something or a tiny bit, a tiny slice of the repertoire, and ignoring all the rest. And if that's what makes you happy, that's fine. You can do that. But I'm talking about people who are, generally speaking, looking around, who like to hear new things, who want to hear new things, and who may get stuck with the idea that, first of all, that these people are so great that there's nothing else worth listening to, or that the fact that they're so great is nonsense and you should be listening only to anything else. There is a happy medium. There's always a happy medium. These great classics have survived. I mean, it's a fact, right? We're still listening to them. And we're still listening to them because evidently enough people find that worthwhile, because they have that quality of staying power. But there's also a ton of music that has not made it into that limited canon of great works, not because it's not great music. It's for political reasons. It's for reasons that have nothing to do with its quality as music qua music. It's because it doesn't impinge on our consciousness for whatever reason. And so the last point I'd like to make when it comes to whether you get sick of the classics and how to deal with these things and some strategies for keeping things fresh is this. The canon of the great classics is always evolving. It evolves slowly. It evolves selectively. It evolves randomly. Mahler was a new addition to the classical canon in the 50s. We still discover new works written hundreds of years ago by Baroque composers who no one ever spoke about. Zelenka, Telemann, people we've known, we know their names, but we never listened to their music. And so there's always this sort of churning of the repertoire, in addition to the basic unchanging repertoire. And there are some unchanging parts of the repertoire that have changed. There are works that are just out of fashion. I've said Tchaikovsky seems to be a little bit of out of fashion now. The Franck Symphony in D minor, oh my. I mean, it was standard stuff. Now, not so much. Does that mean it's any worse? No, of course not. There's always taste. There's always convention, the style of the times, the way things are played, how artists are trained, and what music and repertoire they perform. All of that stuff, it all takes time. Think about the addition to the operatic canon, the Janacek operas. I mean, who knew about Janacek? Opera in Czech? I mean, are you kidding? Dvorak's operas. I mean, Rusalka has just become something of a repertory piece, even though it was written, 100-something years ago. So there are changes possible, slow changes that, so what we're listening to now isn't quite what our ancestors were listening to. Never mind the more modern music, Shostakovich symphonies, things like that never would have been in the original 19th century canon. So there's the sub-canon. There's all kinds of other stuff that we can enjoy. And I think for me, again, and what I recommend to all of you, I mean, beginners or not, is to keep it fresh. Keep it fresh. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to listen to things you haven't heard of. Just keep on listening. It's a message that I think never grows old. It's a classical message because, first of all, you'll find all the things you like that way, and they may or may not be the most popular things. And second of all, if you're worried about the fact that you don't think that the greatest works are the ones that are most inspiring to you, you have to give them time, and you have to give yourself a chance to acclimate to them, and you have to listen to other things and come back. Everything is about comparison, contrast, and your willingness to listen with an open mind and open ears. And that's just some thoughts I wanted to share with you. These are just things that come to mind. And I often ask myself, why are we doing this? How does it really work? I've learned so much. I know I'm rambling now, but I just have to conclude by saying I've learned so much looking at your comments, looking at the way each one of you approaches the act of listening differently. And what the range of taste is just, there's as many different ways of doing this as there are different listeners. And none of them are invalid. Some of them are obnoxious. Some of them may be closed-minded. Some of them may be, I think people are missing things that they might otherwise love. Hey, but that's not my call. That's not my call. I can only suggest and remind you that this body of work is there for you to manipulate as you please in whatever way pleases you most. But have faith. Have faith in the quality of this stuff. Have faith in the composers of genius who wrote this, in the enduring ability to keep things fresh and lively, and that there will always be new stuff and things knocking at the door to be admitted to that immortal canon of perpetually valid and relevant classics. It's much bigger than you think it is. All that matters is how you organize your own listening. So keep on listening, as I've said a few hundred times already, and thanks for joining me. Take care.